Hello.
Welcome to this week's astrology. And this week we start with the eclipses, the eclipse on the 12th, which is what I'm going to talk about this week. So last week on the 3rd, I was looking at the solar eclipse in Leo through the lens of the mundane astrology. So I looked at the eclipse path, the traditional association between eclipses and rulers, and those wider planetary patterns that are shaping the political and collective atmosphere. This week, though, I want to bring the eclipse closer to home and look at it through that personal and symbolic lens. So later in the video, I'll be moving through each of the 12 rising signs, beginning with Aries, to look at where that eclipse is falling in the chart and how it connects with the slower movements of those outer planets. We'll look at the themes and topics that might be alive for you during this eclipse. So in that mundane astrology, the sun is about rulers, kings, governments, those visible figures of authority. It can be celebrity as well. But within our individual lives, the sun is speaking to our inner center. So it's describing our vitality, purpose, our creative agency, but also that sense that we're participating consciously in our own existence. You could say the solar principle is connected with authorship. It's part of us that says, this is my life, these are the things that matter to me, and this is how I want to express what I carry. But during a solar eclipse, that organizing center is temporarily obscured. So the moon passes across the face of the sun and interrupts that ordinary flow of light to us. The sun's still there, obviously, but for that period of time, we can't see it in the usual way. And I think the total eclipse is about 2 minutes, 18 seconds this year. But symbolically, this can describe a period when our familiar senses of identity, direction, or purpose can become less certain for us. And we've also got the lunar eclipse later, 2 weeks' time. I'll do another episode on that, but it's the combination and the nodes changing signs. So very poignant eclipses this year, quite powerful. So it may be that the things that gave us confidence aren't feeling as convincing to us. So we might have had a role that we've occupied for many, many years, but we've got a sense of it losing its vitality. And also we might find ourselves questioning an ambition we've held for some times, or a public identity, and even our creative path or way of being seen by other people. All of these can come under examination during the eclipse. But that eclipse begins with an interruption. So that usual light dims and our eyes need time to adjust. It's a very liminal experience, the actual eclipse. If you've ever experienced one, the light dims, it gets colder, it goes like twilight, the birds stop singing. There's something really powerful about an eclipse. If you want to know about the actual eclipse, go back to last Monday's and the week before. No, I think it was Friday, the August astrology. A lot of information in there about the eclipses if you want to know the technicalities, etc. So as I said, this eclipse is happening on the 12th of August and it's about 19 degrees, 59 minutes of Leo. So Leo is that zodiac sign closely associated with the sun. It's the temple of the sun. So a solar eclipse here brings the solar principle into really sharp focus for us here. So we're looking personally, on a personal level, at questions of visibility, authority, self-expression and creativity. But we're also looking at the heart in a broader sense, that, you know, what it is that gives life warmth and meaning and animation. That's very personal for each of us. So Leo can describe that desire to be recognized, because that recognition for all of us confirms that something within us has reached the world. We create and speak, lead and contribute, and another person's external to us responds to it. And that response can be really nourishing. There's a sense here that as humans, we need to be witnessed. We need to be witnessed. That recognition for all of us can become more complicated when it begins to determine our sense of value. And each one of us will find at some point, and maybe multiple times, that happened to us. So that, what's that look like? It's like gradually organizing our life around maintaining an image. So we might become attached to being seen as capable or successful. Could be about our wisdom, strength, our caring, or we might like to be seen as indispensable. So in this sense, we can continue performing a role a long time after it's stopped carrying genuine life. And absolutely no shame in that, people. We all do it if we look. But the reason I'm mentioning it is the eclipse can interrupt that performance. So we might find there are moments over this period of time when approval just, it doesn't satisfy us, or we can't summon the energy to continue presenting the same version of ourselves. So as I say, it's not a time to, if these things come up, to bash yourself, okay? That old identity could have been entirely appropriate for an earlier stage of life. But all identities, it's persona in Jung's terms, that they can all become narrowed, and they can harden around expectations or responsibility, or just pure habit. So at some point, the life within us begins to exceed the form through which it's been expressed. That's what I'm trying to say. It's a process rather than who we are. Okay? It's something it's us projecting our light out into a persona, into a role. The eclipse, the interruption of this eclipse, asks what happens when the version of ourselves that's occupied the center of us and our lives isn't holding the same authority as it may have done previously in previous years. And as I said, I want to look at the symbolic side of this eclipse for us personally. And it's really interesting, the symbology, because that eclipse is falling in the final minute of the second decan of Leo. So symbolically, the tarot is the Six of Wands, but it's also associated with Jupiter. So that imagery of the Six of Wands involves recognition, success. It is a card of victory and success, and it's depicting the experience of being acknowledged by others, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The symbol of that card is someone emerging from a challenge and being welcomed back or celebrated. It's often connected with the hero's journey, the hero returning with the elixir, yeah. So it's that moment of return. But this eclipse occurs right at the edge, 1 minute of this decan. So just before Leo enters the Mars-ruled third decan, and that is associated with the Seven of Wands. And this card, as you can see, is presented in a completely different situation. That recognition has already occurred. And so the question now becomes whether we are prepared to stand behind what we claimed. Okay. It's asking if we're willing to persevere or embody when that external affirmation isn't guaranteed. Okay. So this eclipse stands at a symbolic threshold between being recognized and taking responsibility for the position we occupy. So those questions are raising of whether our authority comes mainly from the response of others or from a deeper relationship with our own values and vitality. Because when we're not being validated and celebrated and seen, it can really bring us down to where the energy is coming from, whether it's from that validation and being seen, or it is a fire in our, fire in our gut, really. So what I'm saying is applause can tell us that something's been received, but it can't tell us whether that what we're being celebrated for is still alive in us. The eclipse also falls in the bounds of Mercury, and Mercury is present in Leo, so it's playing a real pivotal role in the chart. So that means language, interpretation, and personal narrative is likely to become part of this eclipse story. And we all carry stories about who we are, and some of those stories are given to us really early, so they come through family life, culture, education, social expectation, peer pressure even, but others are shaped by experience. So we learn which qualities are welcome, particularly in childhood, and which are inconvenient. So we learn to discern how we can gain approval, avoid criticism, and have that sense of belonging, which is a very human, necessary human need. But over time, the adaptations we mean to receive that approval and that sense of belonging become identities. So we might end up believing that we're the responsible one, or maybe the quiet one, the strong one. Maybe we see ourselves as the person who holds everything together, or that person who remains on the edge. But these identities often begin as ways of navigating relationships and circumstances. But eventually they become so habitual they can feel like unquestionable truths. So Mercury in Leo is asking who is speaking when we say, this is who I am. I am this. Yeah, kind of is asking us why we think those things. So is that voice expressing something current and alive? Is it repeating an old description that helped us find our place at some point or another? Or is it carrying the expectations of someone whose approval still has power over us? And that can happen long after the person has gone. We find it particularly with our parents, the approval of our parents that we learnt in childhood. We can still be moving out of those patterns, even though we got a big girl or big boy pants on. Okay. So Mercury is closely connected here with the large outer planet pattern in this eclipse chart. So it's opposing Pluto in Aquarius, and here you see it forming supportive aspects with Neptune in Aries and Uranus in Gemini. So Mercury opposite Pluto can bring buried narratives towards the surface. It can expose the beliefs and assumptions operating beneath our everyday thoughts. Sometimes with this configuration, we can discover that a choice we believe to be entirely our own was basically shaped by fear, loyalty, could be shame, or the desire to remain acceptable, to continue feeling we belong, okay? So Pluto can intensify the mind. It draws us into deeper questions, reveals the power that's held within language. So those stories we repeat about ourselves will affect the choices we believe that are available to us. If we're saying, what can I use an example? If we're saying my plans always fail, then we're not going to expect anything to work. I have to take that from my own experience. Okay, so if we're working with this, we've got this narrative going on that it's not going to help us to see the wider possibilities and opportunities. But if you look here, Mercury's connection with Neptune here is going to allow imagination and symbolic awareness to enter into the process. So we might become more receptive to our dreams, images, to subtle impressions or our memories. So we may find those memories coming up. So those subtle impressions, they might carry a lot of meaning, but often there's not the language. We can't logically explain it. So we need to hold those when we receive those dreams, images, memory, subtle impression, hold them, sit with them. Uranus can interrupt that habitual narrative. Uranus is the great disruptor. It's breakthrough. Okay, it's independence. So that can come. We can never we can never predict what Uranus is going to do, but we can kind of formulate something. So sudden breakthrough, Uranus is. So we could have sudden thoughts or a conversation realization, and it can open up a possibility that had been outside our field of vision before. And there may be new language that becomes available, and with it a different understanding of who we're becoming. These outer planets are linking the personal eclipse to the larger collective shifts I explored last week and have been exploring for many weeks. Those outer planets are describing long changes in consciousness, culture, social organization. And as these collective structures change, the language we use to describe identity, leadership, belonging, and authority also changes, can't remain the same. Many of us are living through a period when inherited ideas of success no longer feel stable. You know, those of us who've had the narratives about success in terms of capitalist societies, they've broken down. Okay, so they don't feel stable for many of us. And those familiar milestones of education, work, home, family, and retirement in our current conditions have become really difficult to rely on. And that economic, political, and environmental and technological pressures are altering the shape of our ordinary life as societies globally. Within those massive changes and crises, and that instability, the eclipse is asking deeply personal questions of each of us as individuals. So it's asking, what does it mean to become the author of a life when many of the old scripts aren't working for us? That's not just you personally, it's all of it. How do we re-envision and author the new narrative for our life? And we've also got Jupiter here in Leo, and that's going to enlarge the solar atmosphere around the eclipse. So Jupiter's very fertile. It brings growth, vision, and desires for a more expansive life. So it often increases generosity, courage, and creative confidence. And it can also magnify our hunger or desire to feel important or exceptional. Jupiter's presence suggests that something within us might be reaching for a greater expression. That's a good thing. So then we might have a wish to live more fully, to be able to speak more openly, take up more space. Yeah, just take up more space. That's very hard for many of us. But that expansion needs the living center, if we think of the sun as that living center. So growth driven mainly by comparison or the desire to prove our value or to receive validation can get exhausting now. The question really that we need to be asking is whether these lives we're building can actually hold us. And I'm going to bring in another bit of symbolism here to look at this, and that's the Sabian symbol for the 12th degree of Leo. So the original image, which was written many years ago, is Zuni Indians performing a ritual to the sun. That wording is from, as I say, an earlier period. It carries some of those romantic assumptions of that time. So indigenous people are often portrayed as symbols of a supposedly simple or more natural way of living, while their actual cultures, history, and religious practice are overlooked, and they are rich and deep, okay? So the Zuni are a living people with their own specific traditions. So I'm approaching this as a symbolic image rather than making any claim about their spiritual practices. I just want to name that, make that clear. So at the heart of the image, if we look at it symbolically, is a community turning consciously towards the sun and acknowledging their relationship with the source of life. I mean, the sun goes, there's no life. So it's a really striking image for this degree of a solar eclipse. The sun's temporarily hidden, the people turn towards it. So we my thoughts were that we tend to take the sun for granted because it's there all the time. It's that it rises in the morning, it sets in the evening. So its temporary disappearance reminds us of our dependence on it. Every form of life, as I said, exists within a relationship with that solar energy. So an eclipse can produce that similar recognition within us. When identity, ambition, or our role that's organized our life begins to lose its light and its validity, we become more conscious of what actually sustains us. We're often afraid of losing those because they're kind of comfortable. There's a comfort in that consistency, just like there's a comfort in the sun rising and setting every day. But this Sabian symbol is describing a return to natural energies. For me, my interpretation of that is a return to the deeper rhythms of life. So the rhythms of our body and the seasons are rhythms of creativity and rest, relationship, and the living world in general. And we know modern life is not set up for natural rhythms. It can draw us away from them. So time gets organized around productivity, appointments, notifications, that sense of constant availability that we need to have to make our money and, you know, be productive. We have been metamorphosed into little units of production. That's how we have been taught to think. Very subtly, but it's out there in adverts, it's just out there. Try not to go off on one. So that means our creativity can become another form of output for us. We can start asking whether something's useful, marketable, or visible before we ask whether it's alive. Okay. We use that as our marker instead of, is this life that's in my center that I want to bring out to the world? So this is an opportunity, this eclipse, to notice where we've got separated from the roots of our own vitality. So we might want to ask ourselves what it is that restores warmth to our lives and helps us feel present within our own bodies. It's also a good idea to look at where your creative energy moves naturally. And that is before it becomes shaped by expectation or evaluation. For me, getting lost in a painting because I love painting is where that is warmth and vitality. When I start thinking of painting as a product, something to be sold, it takes something away from it. So if we're asking ourselves these questions, it's kind of listening to ourselves, which is what we need. And this Sabian symbol is containing a communal dimension. This ritual is being performed by a group. The sun's shared, so its light's not belonging to one person. That symbol is offering a really meaningful development of Leo symbolism. So creative power can be expressed through participation, generosity, and the ability to bring warmth into a shared space. A healthy sun allows a life to grow around it. And the image connects really naturally with themes of roots and webs. So the root reminds us that vitality is embodied. We're living beings. We're connected with the land, food, weather, sleep, and even our physical limits. The web reminds us that individual life exists through relationship. Our creativity, choices, and forms of leadership affect other people in the wider world. But this is also carrying this symbol, the mundane story, into the personal realm. So in mundane astrology, the sun describes rulers, governments, visible centers of power, whatever they are in your life. But that Sabian symbol is asking what any center of power ultimately serves. So that government, institution, or economic system can become really detached from the natural conditions that support human life. I don't even need to say that. We're watching it in real action now. And that same pattern can occur within an individual life when the maintenance or status or identity begins to consume the vitality that it was supposed to express. Hope that makes sense. So the eclipse, basically what I'm trying to say is creating a pause in the usual solar display. So it's asking what remains when the performance is interrupted. There's something really moving in this image of people turning towards the sun at the moment when the sun is obscured. The temporary loss of light deepens the relationship with its source. So personally, this might be a period when we're feeling less certain about how we want to be seen. So we might have had a creative direction that's becoming really unclear, or there may be questions arising about a role, or our relationship with authority, or ambitions that shaped our choices for a long time. So be ready for those, okay? But that Sabian symbol is offering a really simple orientation for us all. Return to what gives life. Simple. Complex symbol, simple message. Return to what gives life. You know, and that return for us can involve spending more time outdoors, becoming more attentive to our bodies. It might be allowing creativity to exist without immediately turning it into a product. But it can also mean recognizing that fatigue, grief, uncertainty have their own rhythms and can't be forced into continual forward movement. But also, what it might mean is looking again at the way we use our energy. Leo is a fixed fire sign, so it sustains a creative flame for a long time. But even fixed fire is going to need fuel. When we continue giving attention to a role or situation that no longer nourishes us, that flame can get depleted. So this eclipse might reveal where energy is being spent to uphold an identity rather than to support our lives and to support life in general. It's also worth remembering that eclipse symbolism unfolds over time. The days we've got, usually a couple of weeks before or a couple of weeks after, so the beginning of August, well, mainly most of all, because we got that lunar eclipse, but it's going to be the most concentrated period. But that wider eclipse season continues through the lunar eclipse later in August, and some people say it's a year for every minute, so the outworking of it could unfold over 2 years. So if you get these things come up, don't bash yourself to readjust it all. Just work with it, gently work with it. So in personal astrology, eclipses are commonly understood as opening a process that develops, as I said, over 6 months until the next eclipse season. So the meaning, what I'm trying to say by mentioning this, is the meaning may only become clear through later events, decisions and changes in perception. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, but make note of what's coming up for you, because 6 months down the line, you might see beautiful change there. Okay. So we're going to move on to these signs now, but before I do, I'm using the whole sign houses. So your rising sign will show the area of life in which Leo falls, while Neptune, Uranus, Pluto are going to describe the slower changes already taking place around it. You can use your sun sign if you don't know your rising sign. Okay, so the eclipse might be felt much more personally when it closely contacts a natal planet, an angle, particularly around the 18 to 22 degrees of Leo, Aquarius, Taurus, or Scorpio. So your wider natal chart and current timing techniques will always add more detail. And before I get onto the horoscopes, on that note, if you do want a personal read, either around this eclipse or your solar year ahead, then nip on over to www.soulsymbols.co.uk and subscribe, comment, etc. Okay, I'll see you in your horoscope. Hello, Aries. So this eclipse falls in your 5th house of creativity, pleasure, romance, and children. It's the joy of Venus. Something might be changing in the way you express yourself or in your relationship with being seen. So a creative identity might have felt really natural, and that might have become too closely tied to recognition, productivity, or the response of an audience. Sometimes when we're labeled creator, artist, with our creativity, whatever it is, we then get put in a box and we feel we need to box that product up and sell it. Okay. But this eclipse is going to ask you, what would you create, because it carries life. It might also bring a period of reflection for you around romance, joy, or your relationship with children. So again, where has pleasure become just like responsibility to add on your list? Where has play been crowded out by pressure? And I'm not just talking about play with children, I'm talking about your personal play. It's really important for us to play as adults. We forget that. So you have Neptune here in your first house. So that would be gradually softening an established identity. First house is all about your identity. So you might be feeling a lot more sensitive, intuitive, or even be holding some uncertainty about who you're becoming. Uranus in the third house here is changing how you think, speak, and relate to your immediate environment. So new ideas can arrive really quickly at the moment, and your voice may become less willing to follow familiar scripts or narratives that you have before. Pluto here in the 11th is transforming friendships, communities, and your vision of the future. As people around you and the language you use begin to change, a more authentic, creative self may be seeking expression. And that's what I have for you, Aries. I'll see you on the next one. Hello, Taurus. So this eclipse is falling in your fourth house of home, family, ancestry, and emotional foundations. So this will be a strong one. It's angular. It's the fourth house is an angle. So probably going to be particularly powerful for you Taurus rising. So what's that mean? The familiar center of your private life might be shifting, and it could involve your physical home, your family roles, or an inherited understanding of security. So look at those things that make you feel secure or insecure, or they may just arise naturally. Don't ignore them. This Sabian symbol of returning to the roots is especially strong here for you. What kind of home allows your body and inner life to settle into a more natural rhythm? Maybe questions you or reflections you may want to have. Which family expectations are still shaping the person you believe you should be rather than the person you are? Neptune in the 12th house here is dissolving old unconscious material. So it may increase your sense of needing rest, solitude, and spiritual reflection. So if you have urges to do those, Taurus, it's because of that Neptune in the 12th. Uranus in the second continues to change your relationship with income, possessions, your self-worth. So stability may need to be created differently from the way that you once imagined, okay, or have been doing it. Pluto in the 10th is reshaping vocation, public identity, and your relationship with authority. So this eclipse for you is suggesting that changes in the outer world need to be supported by a stronger and more honest inner foundation. And that's what I have for you, Taurus. I will see you in the next one. Hello, Gemini. So this eclipse is falling in your third house of communication, learning, siblings, and the local environment. Okay, it's the joy of the moon, and you'll be used to this communication, learning from your Mercury ruler. So your voice literally may be changing. An old way of explaining yourself or interpreting experience might not be feeling adequate for you at this point, Gemini. It's probably a time to notice which stories and narratives have become habitual, and ask yourself whether they're still expressing what you know now. So a conversation, a piece of information, or a new course of study might become part of this eclipse process. So if you've been yearning to do that, or you've been looking at that tentatively, it might become something that's much more important over the following 6 months. Uranus is in your first house, and it's beginning a prolonged reinvention of identity in the way that you meet life. You might feel less willing to remain predictable, just to keep other people comfortable. Neptune in the 11th could be changing your ideals and your relationship with communities or collective causes. And the Pluto in your 9th house is in the midst of transforming your beliefs, philosophy, and your understanding of truth. So, Gemini, this eclipse can help you find language for these larger changes. But be patient with yourself and with the process, because that new story might take time to form. That's what I have for you, Gemini. I'll see you on the next one. Hello, Cancer. So the eclipse is falling in your second house of money, resources, values, and self-worth. So you might be having a re-evaluation of what supports you and what consumes too much of your energy. And that includes worry, worry about finances and worry about your sense of value. Financial circumstances could form part of that picture, but really the deeper question with the second house concerns value. So you might get an understanding on where you've measured your worth through usefulness, productivity, or the approval and validation of others. And if you do, ask what it means to organize your resources around what genuinely sustains life. You've also got Neptune in your 10th, so that's reshaping over many years. It will be your relationship with vocation, reputation, and calling. So a professional direction could really feel inspired at times, but uncertain at others, okay? Neptune can bring that vision, it can open up the boundaries to vision and longing, but it can also bring fog and confusion there. And you've got Uranus in your 12th house, and that can disturb old unconscious patterns and increase your need to protect your nervous system. Okay, Uranus is electricity. It's associated with electricity. So, you might be experiencing a slight frying of that. You need to protect. Okay. Pluto in the 8th is transforming your shared finances, dependency, intimacy, and it might be around emotional entanglements as well there. So Cancer, this eclipse is inviting you to establish a more rooted sense of what belongs to you, what you value, and what your energy is worth. And that's what I have for you, Cancer. I'll see you in the next one. Hello, Leo. So it's a doozy for you, okay? Because it's falling, this eclipse, in your first house. It's on the angle, very important. And that brings this eclipse directly into identity, embodiment, and the way you're entering the world. So important for you, Leo. So it might be that a version of yourself that's occupied the center is losing some of its vitality. So you might find yourself less willing to maintain an image or a role that doesn't reflect your inner life. But for you, Leo, this can be a really sensitive period for confidence, because the old way of recognizing yourself might be changing. So allow any uncertainty that you may feel to reveal what feels alive beneath the roles or performance there. You've got Jupiter in the 9th, so that's changing, not Jupiter, you've got Neptune in your 9th, and that's changing your beliefs, spiritual understanding, and your sense of meaning. You may find incredible yearnings that you've not experienced towards spiritual matters, because it does speak of a yearning for unity, Neptune. So be open to that, explore that. That will be over a long period of time for you, Leo, okay? Uranus in the 11th is going to bring movement through your friendships, community, and any future plans you've got. So you might be drawn towards unfamiliar people or new forms of participation. So if you are, open yourself to that, Leo. Then Pluto is in your 7th, and it's profoundly transforming relationships and the way power is negotiated with others. Okay, that's going to be over a long period of time. Pluto's there till, I think, another almost 20 years. So that's not going to happen on the 12th of August. That's the job it's doing, okay? The eclipse might open a new story in that, and particularly something within you that opens that you weren't aware of. So Leo, as those relationships and social affiliations change, you're probably being asked to discover who you are beyond the identities they have been reflecting back to you. Okay, Leo, that's what I have for you. Hello, Virgo. This eclipse is falling in your 12th house. So we've got retreat, hidden life, endings, and what takes place beyond the gaze of other people, basically. So this for you might be a quieter eclipse, drawing attention to any sense of fatigue, withdrawal, or any need to complete a chapter privately. So something might be losing its hold before you're ready to name what comes next. That can be very disconcerting. So hang on in there. You're going to be in a bit of a liminal space with this. The eclipse brings liminality, okay? So if you feel you can, open to that. The return to natural rhythms might involve accepting the body's need for rest and allowing the inner world to move at its own pace. Okay. Neptune in the 8th can blur boundaries within shared finances, intimacy, or emotional responsibility and entanglement. You've got Uranus in your 10th, and that's changing career, public standing, and your relationship with conventional success. And Pluto in that 6th house is transforming work, health, daily routines, literally from the ground up. And remember, all these changes are happening over a long periods of time. So just open to them. Eclipse is probably going to be a new chapter in that growth. So Virgo, your outer life could be changing rapidly while your inner life requires time to release what can no longer accompany you. That's what I have for you, Virgo. I'll see you in the next one. Hello, Libra. So the eclipse is falling in your 11th house of friendship, community, and hopes for the future. So perhaps you're reconsidering where you belong and whether those groups around you are supporting the person you're becoming or who you've become. A social role or long-held aspiration might lose some of its brightness for you, but that's going to create room for a more meaningful form of participation. The question is going to become less about fitting into a community and more about whether you can bring your full creative life into it. Okay. You have Neptune in your 7th house, so that's going to be gradually over the years changing your experience of relationship, and it can heighten both idealism and uncertainty around others. It can bring a fog into your relationships. So watch for those things. The eclipse is probably a new chapter in these long transits here. You have Uranus in your 9th house, so that can be awakening new beliefs, areas of study and ways of seeing the world. Then you've got Pluto in the 5th, so that'll be intensifying your creativity, but also it could be romance and your relationship with personal desire. So Virgo, this eclipse might reveal that your future can't be built entirely around the accommodation of others. Okay, the communities that will endure will need to make room for what's becoming more alive within you. So Virgo, that's what I have for you, and I will see you on the next one. Hello Scorpio. So this eclipse is falling in your 10th house of vocation, reputation, leadership and public identity. It's probably going to be quite a strong one for you because it is on an angle. 10th house is an angular house. Usually becomes stronger for those having the eclipse on their angles. So what does that mean for you? It might mean a professional role or visible responsibilities is entering a period of change for you. So you might be questioning what success means and whether your public life still expresses who you are, the person beneath it, okay? The eclipse can temporarily obscure direction before a new relationship with authority emerges. So a role might be asking more energy from you than it returns, okay? Neptune, you have in your 6th house, and it's dissolving old assumptions about work, service and health, and making sustainable routines increasingly important for you, Scorpio. Uranus in your 8th house is changing shared finances, intimacy and dependency. So where you have those shared finances and particularly dependency or emotional entanglement, you might feel a real change happening here, and that could be sudden, okay? Pluto in your 4th on an angle again is transforming home, family and ancestral foundation, your roots. So Scorpio, the public changes are not going to be, you're not going to be able to separate them from the private ones. So as your roots shift, the role you occupy in the world might also need to change. And that's what I have for you, Scorpio, and I will see you on the next one. Hello, Sagittarius. So the eclipse is falling in your 9th house. So that's around belief, philosophy, education, that's higher education or esoteric education, travel and meaning. So it might mean that a worldview that provided you direction doesn't answer the question that you're asking now. So you may be drawn towards new learning or begin to recognize the limitations of a teacher, a tradition, an ideology that's shaped you here, Sagittarius. So don't worry if those doubts come, allow them in, allow them to percolate. Okay. This eclipse will be asking what gives your life meaning now rather than what you once believed should give it meaning. Okay. You've got Neptune here in your 5th house, so that's going to be deepening your imagination, creativity, and romantic sensitivity, Sagittarius. But it also sometimes make your desire harder to define. Neptune brings confusion and fog, so watch for that one. Don't worry about it if it comes. Uranus is in your 7th house, and that's changing relationships, agreement, and the kind of freedom and independence you need within partnership. You've got Pluto in the 3rd, and that can be transforming your thought, language, and that power of your voice. So, Sagittarius, you've got this eclipse is bringing you a new philosophy that might emerge through lived experience, creativity and conversation rather through certainty alone. Okay, so that's what I have for you, Sagittarius, and I will see you in the next one. Hello, Capricorn. So this eclipse is falling in your 8th house of shared resources, debt, intimacy, grief and psychological entanglement. So you might have something changing in the way that you exchange energy, and that can be money or emotional responsibility, but how you're exchanging all that with others. So this eclipse can expose for you where a bond has become draining or where an old survival pattern continues to govern your choices. It might also bring deeper awareness of grief, vulnerability, or the limits of control. So give yourself space, Capricorn, and allow yourself to be in the feels of that. Okay, be in your feels. Neptune is in your fourth house, and so that's on the angle, and it's about your roots, and it will make home and family life more emotionally porous, and it might awaken a longing for a deeper sense of belonging for you, Capricorn. Then you've got Uranus in your sixth, and that's altering work patterns, health routines, and everyday responsibilities. You may find wake-up calls there, breakthroughs. Yeah. So if that happens in those areas, just align yourself with it and move with that if you can. Pluto, you've got in your second house. So that is beginning a profound transformation of income, values, and self-worth. Okay. So this eclipse for you, Capricorn, is sitting within a larger restructuring of security for you. It's asking what can be released so that your resources and relationships support the life you're now living and who you are. That's what I have for you, Capricorn, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello, Aquarius. So this eclipse is falling in your seventh house of relationship, partnerships, and significant encounters with others. This eclipse will probably be powerful for you because it's landing on your angles, okay? And it tends to have a lot of impact, particularly if you've got planets in your natal chart that are making aspects or connecting with that eclipse. So what does that mean for you? It could be a relationship is entering a new phase, or you're seeing more clearly how authority, attention, and recognition are distributed between you. Okay, those power dynamics, really. The eclipse can reveal where someone else's response has become too influential in determining your sense of self, but it can also illuminate the way you're witnessed, supported, or overshadowed within relationship. So yeah, that might be a new chapter for you opening up. You then have Pluto in your first house. With the eclipse, it's opposite the eclipse, okay? So Pluto in your first house has already been transforming identity, embodiment, and personal power. So with that relationship, those shifts may come, particularly with your sense of your own power. You've got Neptune in the third, and that's going to be changing perception and communication. So that makes it really important to distinguish intuition from assumption, because Neptune can bring that fog and that confusion there, okay? Uranus you've got in the fifth, so that is awakening and breaking through in terms of your creativity, desire, and the need for freer forms of self-expression. Gives that real sense of independence, Uranus, and rebellion, I might add, Aquarius. So for you, Aquarius, relationships are becoming one of the places that your personal transformation is being reflected back to you. So the question is whether your bonds can evolve alongside the person you're becoming. And that's what I have for you, Aquarius, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello, Pisces. So this eclipse is falling in your sixth house of work, service, health, and daily rhythms. So this connects really strongly with that Sabian theme of returning to natural energies. So it might be that a routine for you has become unsustainable, or work's drawing too heavily upon your vitality, or not giving you enough space to do the other things in your life, maybe exercise, maybe, your more pleasurable aspects of life. So this eclipse is asking whether that structure of everyday life is supporting the body that has to live within it. So small adjustments to pace, boundaries, or workload may carry more significance than they first appear to. So be open and aware of that. You've got Neptune in your second house, and that's gradually reshaping monies, values, and self-worth. There might be a need for greater clarity around what you give and what you receive. And that could be the work you're putting out there, the way you gain your income. You may be giving more than you're receiving, Pisces. You can be kind of very compassionate and giving. So be aware of that. Make sure your work, your income, your source of living has got the right value on it. Uranus in your fourth house can bring changes within home, family, and your emotional foundations. And Pluto in your 12th is beginning a long process, 20 years long process of psychological clearing. So that will be bringing hidden patterns and unfinished material closer to your consciousness. And that will be for embracing it, holding all parts of yourself. Okay. So Pisces, this eclipse for you is going to bring practical changes within daily life that might help you navigate much deeper internal and domestic transformations. And that's what I have for you, Pisces. I will see you in the next one. Pay attention to what begins losing its familiar brightness around this eclipse. Notice whatever is tiring to maintain. You can also notice where you're being drawn towards a more natural pace or more honest form of expression, but definitely where you're drawn towards a deeper relationship with your own vitality. There might be areas of life that have become governed by an artificial rhythm. We all are. So that might be that continual productivity, visibility, confidence, or the pressure to know what comes next. You may be having your relationship with uncertainty developing. Okay. The eclipse allows that rhythm to falter. So within the pause, something more rooted may begin to emerge. So we might find ourselves returning to simple sources of orientation, such as the movement of the daylight or the moon, the needs of the body, the presence of other people, and the work that carries meaning, even when there's no one else there to applaud it. So perhaps a deeper solar question concerns what our light is connected to. Because we have that image of a flame, and if it's isolated from its source, it eventually burns out. So a flame that belongs to a living cycle can be renewed over and over again. It's fueled. Okay. So as this eclipse approaches, allow the meaning of it to unfold gradually. There's no need to have a dramatic change simply because the sky is dramatic. Okay. Observe, be the witness to your inner and outer life. Look at what's being obscured and what it becomes visible through its absence. If something is being obscured, there is something waiting to become visible behind that. The sun returns, although our relationship with it might be different after this eclipse period. I'm thinking that the deeper invitation of this Leo eclipse is to recover a form of creative authority that is rooted in life, connected with others, and sustained by something deeper than performance. And that's what I have for you. I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.